When my daughter got married, I kept the ultimate secret. I never told her that I had inherited my brother's automobile dealership empire worth $11 million. And thank God I stayed silent, because exactly 9 days after I paid for her dream wedding, my brand new son-in-law walked into my workshop with a stack of legal papers designed to have me declared mentally unfit. But his confident smile vanished completely the moment he realized the man he was trying to outsmart had been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time. Before I tell you exactly how this whole scheme came crashing down around him, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, son or daughter. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe family members who try to steal from their own blood always get exactly what's coming to them. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 68 years old. For 41 years, I ran a small auto repair shop on the edge of Cedar Falls, Ohio, the kind of place where the same families brought their trucks in for 3 generations. I wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. I drove a 2009 pickup with 210,000 miles on it. To anyone passing by, I looked exactly like what I was. A tired old mechanic, with grease in the creases of his knuckles that never quite washed out. What almost nobody knew, including my own daughter, was that my younger brother Frank had built something enormous out in Phoenix. Frank never married, never had kids of his own. He took the modest loan I'd given him back in 1987 to open his first lot and turned it into a chain of 9 dealerships across Arizona. When Frank passed away 18 months ago from a heart attack at his desk, he left every last cent of it to me. $11 million in assets, real estate, and inventory. I didn't sell it. I didn't move to Phoenix and start wearing silk shirts. I quietly hired a management team to keep it running, kept driving my old truck, and kept fixing transmissions 5 days a week, because that's simply who I am. My daughter, Megan, is 29. She's the only family I have left since my wife Carol died of cancer 6 years ago. I raised Megan mostly on my own after that, working extra Saturdays to pay for her community college tuition, teaching her to change her own oil so no man could ever take advantage of her ignorance about cars. I thought I'd done a decent job. I thought I'd raised someone with a good head on her shoulders. Then 11 months ago, she brought home a man named Derek Sandoval. Derek sold insurance, or said he did, though I never once saw him go to an actual office. He had a smile that never quite reached his eyes and a habit of glancing around any room he walked into like he was pricing the furniture. From the very first dinner, something in my gut told me to be careful. So when Megan mentioned, just in passing, over coffee one Sunday, that Derek's family had been asking strange questions about whether I owned my shop outright or whether I had any other property, I made a decision right then. I never told her about Frank's money, not one word. As far as Megan knew, her father was exactly what he appeared to be, a mechanic living paycheck to paycheck, with maybe $12,000 saved for retirement, if he was lucky. 3 weeks before the wedding, Megan called me in tears saying the venue she wanted, a vineyard outside of Columbus, would cost $95,000 all in, and her future in-laws had offered to pay half if I covered the rest. I didn't even hesitate. I wired $63,000 from an account Derek and his family didn't know existed, an account holding part of the dealership proceeds, but I wired it through my regular checking account so it looked exactly like what a struggling mechanic emptying his life savings would do. I wanted them to see exactly that, a father bleeding himself dry for his little girl. The wedding was beautiful, string lights, an open bar, Megan in her mother's altered wedding dress, crying as we danced to the same song Carol and I had danced to 30 years earlier. For one single evening, I let myself believe that maybe I'd been wrong about Derek. Maybe he really did love my daughter. 9 days later, I found out exactly how wrong that hope was. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was under a Silverado in my shop bay when I heard the bell over the front door chime. I rolled out from under the truck and there was Derek, standing in the doorway in a suit that cost more than I made in 2 weeks, holding a leather folder under his arm. Behind him, almost hiding, was a heavy-set man I'd never seen before, carrying a briefcase and looking deeply uncomfortable, like he already regretted whatever he was about to be part of. "Walter," Derek said, using my first name the way you'd address a subordinate, not a father-in-law. "We need to talk about your living situation." I wiped my hands on a rag, taking my time, watching his eyes flick toward the man with the briefcase like he needed reassurance he wasn't doing this alone. "My living situation is fine, Derek. I own this shop outright. I own my house outright. What exactly is the problem?" That's actually what we want to discuss. He set the folder down on my workbench, right next to a carburetor I'd been rebuilding, like the grease and metal disgusted him. Megan and I have noticed you've been forgetting things lately, repeating yourself, getting confused about dates. I stood there perfectly still, because not one word of that was true, and we both knew it. I haven't forgotten a single thing in my life, son. It's not an insult, Walter. It's a concern. He opened the folder and slid a thick document across the workbench toward me, the kind with a dozen yellow tabs sticking out marking places to sign. This is a voluntary guardianship petition. It would name Megan and myself as your legal conservators. It simply means we'd help manage your finances and your property, just to protect you, in case anything were to happen. The man with the briefcase cleared his throat. Sir, I'm a licensed evaluator. I just need to ask you a few basic cognitive questions, and then, assuming everything checks out the way Mr. Sandoval described, we can move forward with the paperwork today. The way Mr. Sandoval described. Those 4 words told me everything. Derek had already decided what the outcome would be before this man ever walked through my door. I looked past Derek toward the parking lot and saw Megan sitting in his car, staring down at her phone, refusing to come inside, refusing to even look at me through the windshield. My own daughter, sitting outside while her husband tried to have me declared incompetent in the very shop where I'd taught her to check her own brake pads at age 15. Just sign where it's tabbed, Walter, Derek said, sliding a pen across the bench. It honestly makes things so much simpler for everyone. We don't have time to stand here arguing about it all afternoon. I have a 4 o'clock. I looked down at that pen sitting on my workbench, gold-plated, completely out of place next to my socket wrenches. I looked at Derek's manicured fingers, tapping impatiently against the leather folder. And then I looked one more time through the window at my daughter, who had once cried in my arms the night her mother died, who I had carried up to bed when she fell asleep on the couch 100 times as a little girl, and who now couldn't bring herself to walk through a door to watch her own father be declared unfit to run his own life. Something inside me, the part of me that had spent 41 years being patient, being the calm one, being the man who absorbed every hit without flinching, finally cracked. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the pen across the room, though God knows I wanted to. I have learned, over almost 7 decades, that the loudest man in the room rarely wins anything. So instead, I picked up the document, flipped through it slowly, page by page, while Derek's foot tapped against the concrete floor with growing irritation, and I asked one simple question. Who drafted this petition exactly? Derek's jaw tightened just slightly. Does it matter? It's standard language. It matters to me. I'd like a name. He hesitated half a second too long before answering, my family's attorney, Wexford and Green. I nodded slowly and set the document back down on the workbench, not signed and not torn up either, just set down. I'll need a few days to review this with my own attorney before I sign anything that hands over control of my finances and my property to another adult. Derek's composure slipped for the first time. Walter, this really isn't something that needs a lawyer. It's a family matter. Everything involving signatures and property is a legal matter, son. I may be old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm certainly not signing away my house to a man I've known for less than a year. I turned to the evaluator, who looked genuinely relieved someone had finally pumped the brakes. I appreciate you driving out here, but I won't be doing the assessment today. Derek's mouth opened like he wanted to push harder, then closed again when he realized I wasn't moving. He scooped the folder back up off the workbench so fast he nearly knocked over a can of brake cleaner, gave me a tight, furious smile, and walked out without another word. Through the window, I watched him climb into the car, say something sharp to Megan, and pull out of my lot fast enough that his tires actually chirped against the asphalt. I stood alone in my shop for a long time after that, the Silverado still up on the lift, my hands shaking slightly in a way they hadn't shaken in years. My own daughter had sat in that car. She hadn't come inside. She hadn't said one word in my defense. Whatever Derek had told her about me, whatever story he had built in her head over these past months, she had believed enough of it to let this happen. That night I didn't call Megan. I called someone else instead. I called Carol's older brother, my brother-in-law Richard, who happened to be a retired estate attorney in Cincinnati, and the only person on this earth, other than Frank's old accountant, who knew the full truth about the Phoenix dealerships. Richard listened to the entire story without interrupting once, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment before he said something I'll never forget. Walter, you need to understand what you just walked away from. A voluntary guardianship, once signed, can take months and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to undo, even if you're perfectly competent. People do this to elderly parents with money every single day, and most of those parents never see a courtroom because their kids talk them into signing before anyone smart gets involved. I asked him the obvious question. Why now? Why 9 days after the wedding? Richard didn't hesitate. Because Derek's family did their homework, Walter. Somebody found out about Frank, maybe a public record, maybe a loose-lipped accountant. Maybe Megan said something to Derek she didn't even realize mattered. They're not trying to protect you. They're trying to get ahead of $11 million before you have the chance to put it somewhere they can't touch it. I sat in my dark kitchen that night with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and for the first time since Frank's funeral, I let myself really think about what that money meant and what it would mean if it fell into Derek Sandoval's hands instead of staying protected for whatever was left of my life and whatever I eventually chose to leave behind. The next morning I called my own attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, who had handled Frank's estate and who I trusted completely. I told her everything. The guardianship petition, the evaluator, Megan sitting silently in the car. Patricia didn't waste time being shocked. She'd seen this exact playbook more times than she could count. Within 2 days, she had pulled the petition Derek's family attorney had filed and found something Derek clearly hadn't expected anyone to check. The petition listed me as having, quote, limited and insufficient assets to manage independently, end quote. A claim built entirely on my modest checking account and the appraised value of my small shop. Whoever drafted it had no idea Frank's estate existed at all. Which meant Derek's plan wasn't actually about protecting a man with $11 million. It was about controlling a man they genuinely believed was broke, so that when the inheritance eventually surfaced, as inheritances often do through public probate records or careless conversation, they would already be sitting in the legal driver's seat, with guardianship papers already signed, ready to claim it was always meant to be managed by them. Patricia helped me see the opportunity hiding inside their own arrogance. Instead of simply fighting the petition and walking away, which would only buy me a temporary win and leave Derek free to try again with a smarter approach later, we built something more permanent. Patricia drafted an irrevocable trust that placed every single asset from Frank's estate, all $11 million of it, into a structure that named Megan as the sole future beneficiary, but only Megan, with Derek explicitly and permanently excluded by name from any access, any signing authority, or any claim whatsoever. Even in the event of divorce, death, or any future guardianship proceeding brought against me by anyone, it was airtight. It was also, Patricia warned me gently, going to break my daughter's heart when she eventually found out the lengths her own husband had gone to. I sat with that warning for 3 full days before I acted. On the 4th day, I called Megan and asked her to come to the shop alone. No Derek. She showed up looking smaller than I remembered, dark circles under her eyes, twisting her wedding ring around her finger the entire time we spoke. I didn't yell at her. I didn't lecture her about loyalty or about the cousin she was supposed to be defending her own father from. I simply laid the guardianship petition on the workbench, the same workbench Derek had set it on 9 days earlier, and I asked her to read it slowly, every page, every word about my supposed cognitive decline and my supposed insufficient assets. She read it twice. The second time, her hands were trembling. He told me you'd been getting confused, she whispered. He told me you called him by the wrong name twice. He told me your neighbor mentioned you'd left the stove on. End quote. Unquote. Megan, I haven't spoken more than 5 sentences to Derek in the past month, and our neighbor Phyllis hasn't said a word to me since her dog dug up my tomatoes in July. None of that happened. She pressed her palms against her eyes, and for the first time since the wedding, I watched my daughter actually cry. Not the happy tears from the dance floor, but the kind that comes from realizing the floor you've been standing on was never solid at all. I told her, gently, about Frank, about the dealerships, about the $11 million sitting quietly in Phoenix that I had never once mentioned to her. Not because I didn't trust her, but because the moment I told her, I knew it would change the way the people around her treated both of us, and I had wanted, just for a little while longer, for her to be loved for exactly who she was and nothing else. I also told her about the trust, about Derek's name, permanently, legally excluded. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, It wasn't to defend Derek. It was to ask me one question, quietly. Dad, was I wrong about him this whole time? I didn't answer that for her. I told her that was a question only she could answer, but that I'd be there, exactly as I'd always been, whatever she decided. She moved out of Derek's apartment that same week. The guardianship petition was formally withdrawn before it ever reached a judge, once Derek's own attorney realized. After reviewing the trust documents Patricia made certain found their way into the right hands, that pursuing it any further would now accomplish absolutely nothing for him and would only expose his original petition as fraudulent, built on fabricated claims about my mental state that I had documentation, witnesses, and a fully competent, independent medical evaluation, the real one, to disprove. Derek's attorney quietly advised him to drop it entirely, rather than risk a countersuit for elder abuse and fraud, which Patricia made very clear we were fully prepared to file. 6 months later, Megan filed for divorce. It wasn't easy for her, and I never once told her I told you so, because watching your child go through that kind of grief isn't a victory lap for anyone, even when you saw it coming from the first dinner. What I did instead was simply show up. I drove the 2 hours to help her move her things out of that apartment myself, the same way I'd helped her move into her first dorm room a decade earlier. I fixed the brakes on her car for free, the way I always had, and for the first time in almost a year, she laughed at one of my terrible jokes while we worked side by side in my shop, grease on both our hands. I still wear the same 3 flannel shirts. I still drive the same old truck with too many miles on it. The dealerships in Phoenix still run quietly under the management team Frank trusted, generating more money in a single month than I made in 5 years fixing transmissions, and almost nobody in Cedar Falls knows a single thing about any of it. Megan knows now, of course, and she's never once asked me for a dime of it, which tells me more about who she really is than anything else could. The trust still stands exactly as Patricia built it, locked tight, waiting quietly for the day my daughter will need it, with one name permanently, legally, and forever absent from every page. Some men measure what they're worth by what they're willing to show the world. I learned a long time ago, watching my own father get taken advantage of in his final years by people who smelled weakness the moment his hands started shaking, that the quiet ones are usually the ones who end up just fine. I kept my mouth shut for 18 months, and that silence is the only reason my daughter still has a father who can look her in the eye, and the only thing Derek Sandoval ever got out of marrying into this family was a very expensive lesson in exactly who he was dealing with. Real strength rarely needs to raise its voice. Walter didn't fight Derek with anger. He protected what mattered with patience, paperwork, and quiet love for his daughter, even when she couldn't see clearly yet. That's the gift of staying steady. It gives the people we love room to find their way back to us. Hold your peace, keep your door open, and trust that truth has its own timing. Xin Louis, câu chuyện trên đôi AI sáng tạo và hư cấu nhằm mang lại giá trị giải trí cho người xem, đồng thời gửi gắm một bài học nhân văn tích cực trong cuộc sống.